Imagine this. The King of England, seated in his royal chambers, lifts a delicate glass vial to his lips. Courtiers watch in silence. The liquid inside is expensive, exotic, and said to hold life-giving power. He drinks, believing it will strengthen his body, sharpen his mind, and perhaps even cheat death. The recipe? Powdered human skull. This wasn't some macabre rumor whispered by his enemies. It was fact. Charles II, the Merry Monarch, ruler of Restoration England, regularly drank a concoction known as the King's Drops. Its main ingredient came from ground-up pieces of human bone, often taken from the skulls of executed criminals. Welcome to 17th-century medicine, where kings, nobles, and doctors agreed that the cure for sickness was cannibalism. The Merry Monarch and his obsessions. Charles II is usually remembered for his charm, mistresses, and endless appetite for pleasure. But behind the silks and laughter, he had another obsession: science. He founded the Royal Society, tinkered with chemistry experiments, and surrounded himself with scholars, alchemists, and physicians. In an age when the line between science and magic was blurred, Charles wanted to be both king and experimenter. He collected laboratory equipment, distilled strange concoctions, and sought remedies that promised vigor and long life. And when his advisors told him that powdered skulls could heal, Charles listened. The world of corpse medicine, as strange as it sounds, Charles II wasn't doing anything unusual for his time. Across Europe, mummy medicine was a thriving industry. Apothecaries sold jars of powdered bone, dried flesh, and even bottled human fat as medicine. The belief came from ancient ideas about sympathetic magic, that consuming part of the human body could transfer strength, vitality, or healing. If someone had epilepsy, doctors might prescribe powdered skull, believing the solid bone would strengthen the weak brain. One physician recommended scraping skull fragments directly from the heads of the freshly dead, preferably young and healthy. A pope once drank powdered skull in wine to cure illness. Even philosophers like Francis Bacon dabbled with mummy remedies. It was gruesome, but respectable. Skulls, executioners, and apothecaries the best source of ingredients? Public executions. Executioners didn't just swing the axe. They were unofficial pharmacists. The blood of the freshly killed was believed to treat epilepsy. Onlookers sometimes rushed forward to dip bread into it, swallowing while it was still warm. The bones and skulls were even more valuable. Apothecaries ground them into powders, mixing them into potions like Charles's King's Drops. It was medicine, business, and superstition rolled into one. So when Charles sipped his skull potion, he was following medical advice. Horrifying, yes, but mainstream. The birth of the King's Drops. Charles II was so committed to this remedy that he bought the recipe from a court physician. The potion was a complex distillation of human skull mixed with alcohol and herbs. It was expensive, time-consuming to prepare, and marketed as a cure-all. Charles not only drank it, he produced it himself in his private laboratory. Imagine the King of England, in his royal palace, grinding up bone and brewing it into a tonic. He treated the process like alchemy, convinced he had captured the vital essence of life in liquid form. It became known as the King's Drops, not because it was invented for him, but because he embraced it so enthusiastically. Why a skull? But why specifically skulls? In early modern medicine, the skull was seen as the seat of human vitality. Bones carried strength, and the skull, protecting the brain, carried something greater, spirit. The logic was gruesome but consistent. Drinking a skull potion meant ingesting the essence of another person's life. By absorbing their vitality, you strengthened your own. It was medicine by metaphor. Strong bones for weak bones. Skulls for troubled minds. Blood for vitality. The court's reaction. What did courtiers think as their king drank human remains? Likely nothing unusual. Physicians presented corpse medicine as cutting-edge treatment. Nobles were accustomed to strange remedies, from unicorn horn powder to bezoar stones from goat stomachs. Besides, kings were expected to use the best remedies available. If the best came from powdered skulls, then so be it. Charles himself defended the potion as science, not superstition. In a time when medical theory was shaky at best, skull dust and brandy seemed as reasonable as anything else. A gruesome normality. It's easy to laugh now, but corpse medicine wasn't seen as grotesque then. It was a logical extension of two beliefs: that the body carried vital energy, and that consuming it could transfer health. And it wasn't confined to shady quacks. The greatest physicians of the age prescribed it. Royal apothecaries stocked it. Kings drank it. Popes drank it. Ordinary people drank it. Charles II simply gave his name and royal endorsement to one of history's strangest medical trends. The foreshadowing, the irony, of course, is that Charles's obsession with the king's drops did not save him. When his health finally collapsed in 1685, his doctors bled him, blistered him, dosed him with laxatives, and yes, gave him skull drops. None of it worked. The king, who believed powdered bone held the key to vitality, died at age 54. After suffering one of the most overtreated deaths in medical history. But the full story doesn't end with him. Because the truly shocking part isn't just that Charles drank skull potion. It's that the entire elite of Europe believed in medical cannibalism. So here we have it, Charles II of England, merry monarch, an amateur scientist, drinking powdered human skull and wine and calling it medicine. It wasn't fringe. It wasn't scandal. It was respectable, fashionable, even royal. But the story doesn't end there. Because in Section 2, we'll reveal the truly shocking twist: Charles wasn't alone. From peasants to popes, Europe's most powerful people routinely consumed human remains, bones, blood, fat, as cures for everything from headaches to epilepsy. And in the end, Charles II's king's drops weren't just the eccentric quirk of a monarch. They were a window into a Europe that had quietly embraced cannibalism in the name of health. Charles II may have been famous for drinking his skull potion, but here's the twist: he wasn't alone. Far from it. In fact, across 16th and 17th century Europe, medical cannibalism was mainstream. The king's drops were just the royal version of a remedy everyone else already knew. The truly bizarre part is how ordinary and respectable it all was. Drinking blood at the gallows. Let's start with fresh blood. In early modern Europe, it was widely believed that human blood contained life force. Fresh, warm, still pulsing with vitality. And the best way to get it? From an execution. Crowds at public executions didn't just come to watch. They came to collect. As the axe fell or the noose tightened, bystanders rushed forward to dip cups, rags, or bread into the victim's blood. Some drank it on the spot, others carried it home. Epilepsy patients in particular were told to drink warm human blood to prevent seizures. Apothecaries even sold bottled blood, marketed as a cure for everything from nosebleeds to anemia. So while Charles sipped skulls in a palace, ordinary townsfolk sipped blood in the streets. Powdered skulls and ground bones, but it wasn't just blood. Skull powder was one of the most common remedies in Europe. Apothecaries stocked it in jars, often labeled with Latin names to disguise the grisly truth. The skulls of the young, freshly dead, were considered best, especially those killed violently. The belief was that sudden death trapped vital energy in the bone, making it more potent. Physicians prescribed powdered skull mixed with wine to treat epilepsy, headaches, and weakness of the brain. Charles II's drops were simply the luxury version of this very common cure. Ordinary patients might scrape dust from a skull on display in a church ossuary. The king brewed his own distillation. The same logic, different budgets. Human fat as ointment. The body wasn't just for drinking. It was also for rubbing. Human fat, harvested from corpses, was used in ointments to treat wounds and joint pain. Executioners again played a central role, selling fat from the bodies of criminals to physicians and apothecaries. One 17th-century German doctor recommended rubbing human fat directly on aching limbs as a cure for arthritis. Some soldiers even smeared it on wounds, believing it helped them heal faster. Yes, Europe was literally greasing itself with the dead. Popes, nobles, and intellectuals. What makes this even stranger is that it wasn't limited to common folk or shady back-alley healers. Elites joined in. Pope Innocent VIII was allegedly fed the blood of young boys in a desperate attempt to cure illness. Francis I of France was known to drink mixtures containing powdered bone. Francis Bacon, philosopher and pioneer of the scientific method, experimented with corpse medicine. Even Protestant reformers who rejected superstition often quietly endorsed mummy powders. It was respectable. The most educated men of the age, kings, scholars, popes, all indulged in medical cannibalism without shame. The mummy trade, the biggest business of all, was mummy. Not mummies from Egypt in the cinematic sense, but powdered resin and flesh from embalmed bodies. From the Middle Ages to the 18th century, mummy powder was one of the most expensive and widely traded medicines in Europe. Apothecaries imported it by the barrel. Patients swallowed it, mixed it into drinks, or applied it to wounds. Egyptian tombs were plundered for bodies. When the supply ran short, forgers faked it with freshly embalmed corpses. The trade was so lucrative that people literally manufactured fake mummies for sale in Europe. Charles II's king's drops were part of this same culture, the belief that the dead could heal the living. Why they believed it from our perspective, it seems grotesque. But to them, it was logical. The medical philosophy of the time was sympathetic magic. Like cures, like skull for the brain, blood for vitality, fat for strength. And medicine was still primitive. Germ theory didn't exist. Antibiotics were centuries away. With so few effective remedies, people clung to whatever seemed to work. If swallowing bone dust made you feel better, even through placebo, you praised it as miraculous. The king's final irony: Charles II himself leaned heavily on the king's drops in his later years. When he fell gravely ill in 1685, his doctors tried everything, bleeding him, blistering his skin, dosing him with herbs, and, of course, drowning him in skull potion. They poured so many remedies into his body that historians call it one of the most overtreated deaths in history. None of it worked. Charles II died at 54, weakened not just by illness, but by the very medicine he believed would save him. The king who drank skulls to preserve his life ended up proving the limits of corpse medicine. The shocking reveal, and here's the final twist. Charles wasn't eccentric, or even unusual. He was ordinary. Ordinary in a Europe that had quietly normalized medical cannibalism. From popes to peasants, the continent spent centuries swallowing skulls, drinking blood, and smearing human fat as medicine. Charles II was simply the most famous example. His royal drops making the practice impossible to hide. So the story isn't just that one king drank powdered skull. It's that the elites of Europe, kings, nobles, scholars, were all cannibals. Not in secret, not as scandal, but as medicine. So next time you think of Charles II as the merry monarch, remember this: behind the laughter, the mistresses, and the wigs, he was sipping skull dust from a royal vial, convinced it was the secret to life. And stranger still, his courtiers, his doctors, and most of Europe agreed. That's the legacy of the king's drops, a reminder that history's most powerful people were sometimes its strangest